Hello. Hey, everyone. We're at 38 remaining participants, probably 37 if Lydia's not there. Um, all right, we'll begin. All right, this presentation workshop is about vibrato, theremin vibrato. If you're out there watching this live, or if you're watching a recording of this after the event's over, thanks for deciding to watch. This is it's kind of a crazy topic to pick and focus on. Um, can everybody hear me okay? I just want to make sure signal's good and not too loud. So like I don't want to make a outburst and then like break someone's eardrums.
Signal's good.
All right. And then same thing with the theremin. So tell me if this is at a um, decent volume level and not too loud to break anyone's eardrum.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Perfect. All right. Yeah, so we're talking about theremin vibrato, and um, it's a pretty deep subject, or a kind of like uh, kind of a small thing. It really it depends on what your approaches are in music. Um, but vibrato can be treated like a something really important, or something that you kind of it's just throw away. Like I'll work on that, when I have time. It's not that important because I just want to play the right notes, or or I just want to match the ensemble I'm playing with, or the music I'm playing with. Um, but I what I'm going to share in this presentation or workshop is really like my perspective on vibrato. And I think I've got a pretty unique perspective, considering my background. Um, I know there's a few people like me, but not too many. Um, so if if you're watching this and you're wondering who this guy is, and what does he know, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Randy George. I'm a thereminist of 15 years. If you're not familiar with me, or anything I've done, it's probably just because I kind of disappeared off the internet for a number of years, and I was at the very beginning of my theremin playing journey. I was creating a lot of videos on YouTube, and then I stopped doing that for a little while. I never stopped playing the theremin. That was always there, and it's always been as important as it was for me since the beginning. Um, but yeah, I've been playing for 15 years. Everybody's got like a kind of a background story, and how they found the instrument, how they um, came to fall in love with it, or I mean, in some people's cases, decide to make that their career path, or their goal in life, to perform for others, and excel at the instrument, or just make it their focus. Um, so I'm one of these people who's decided to make it their focus. But before the theremin, I got a little bit of a backstory. So I'm formerly a wind musician, a wind player. I started playing the alto saxophone when I was in early grade school, and I grew up in Texas, Dallas, Texas, in the USA, and that is a pretty crazy place for music education. So I was really like uh, kind of deeply embedded into that just by being around. So I started playing saxophone in the sixth grade, and then in 10th grade I started playing the bassoon. And the bassoon is an instrument that I played all the way until 2000 and, 2004, let's just say. In 2004, I stopped playing and I actually sold my instrument. But during that period of time, I focused on the bassoon. I actually have a degree in music performance from the University of North Texas, and I have a, yeah, focused. I have a primary focus on the bassoon. And then after graduating from college as an undergraduate, I did not go back to school. I went out and played in orchestras. So I played in local symphony orchestras in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I did that for a few years. So I kind of started from nowhere, playing as a beginner, and made it all the way to professional level. And not just a professional level, but like very a very high level. I mean, I can't really go into too much depth about that because what does it mean anyway? But if you can imagine a decent bassoon player, that's where that's what I became. And so before the theremin, I had all this experience as a musician already, and I think this is very important for anybody who's deciding to make the theremin a career or make a career out of the theremin or performing with the theremin. Is that learning another instrument is very important. And even if you're starting the theremin and it's your first instrument, it's very important to learn another instrument at the same time, because there's things about there's things about music and about music theory and performance that you need another interface to be able to fully grasp. So now to wrap back around to this introduction is like, I just wanted to mention that I had this experience before the theremin, and all of that previous experience folded into and contributed to where I started when I started playing the theremin. That put me at a pretty significant advantage for dealing with the immense learning curve that this instrument is associated with. I mean, I don't think anybody can deny it. It's very difficult. But when you play another instrument, or when you have prior music experience with another instrument, it takes the edge off, like a lot of the edge off. So when I see someone, or when someone tells me they're playing the theremin as their first instrument, I highly recommend that they learn another instrument at the same time. I know that sounds like a lot to do all at once, but it's not, considering the resources that are available on the internet for learning any instrument. You can literally just type in a search for whatever instrument it is, and there's guaranteed to be an expert on that instrument. For the theremin, it's not that straightforward, just because there's lower numbers of people that are playing the instrument, and then even if there's a lot of people playing the instrument, there's a very small number of people who can translate the information of their experience into structured guidance of what you're supposed to do if you want to achieve a certain thing. So that was kind of super long-winded explanation, but I'd rather you start with an explanation of my background. I'd rather we go into this knowing where I come from, and instead of me just charging right into like what you're supposed to do. So in this topic is kind of like, it's kind of ambiguous for a lot of people. We know that it's something that you add to a sound, a theremin voice, to kind of give it excitement and kind of add more color to the melody or whatever it is that you're doing melodically, or even if it's not melodic, you're doing something to the sound. You're modulating it. Um, I mean, it's something that you're going to come across if you play the theremin. I, I, I've been playing for such a long time. I think I still haven't come across very many players that just like play straight tone all the time, and that's their preference, and they just never attempted a vibrato. It's there. So this Theremin Academy, it's a really wonderful uh, opportunity to to kind of have a space to gather people who actually want to dive into this subject. And I have a couple goals, but the main goal is for you who's watching and anybody who's watching the recording afterwards to actually like have something when it's done. Like I want to empower you with either some knowledge or tools to improve this really unusual and ambiguous in general subject or area of theremin playing. So since I've been playing, uh, I've watched I've watched presentations of various teachers talk about vibrato and how they approach it. Uh, there's good things, good suggestions people make, and I think they apply really nicely to particular playing technique or a style or a particular player's technical approach. But what I find is kind of a common thread between everybody that's talking about vibrato is we kind of skip over um, a lot of core ideas about vibrato, and I've done it myself. That's why I say we. um, you want to just jump straight into how you're supposed to do it. What you're supposed to do with your arm to make that vibrato happen. And so when I got the idea of doing this topic, I realized that it's not really that helpful to tell people what exactly to do with their arms. I can show you what I do, but it's a common theme with a lot of teachers. It can show you all the different approaches, but you're gonna have to decide for yourself how you go about executing, how you go about achieving that thing, whatever it is. If it's articulation or pitch technique, playing fingering techniques, or even how you tune the instrument. So when you're talking about something like vibrato, there's quite a few different approaches. Um, so I can tell you what I do in general. We'll just start with that before we dive into to go even deeper into what vibrato is and all that. I'm just going to show you what I do and how I execute it, because I know you can hear me now on the theremin, that is. And if you're there watching, I know you can hear me because you're there watching. Okay, so I'm going to start playing a note, and I'm going to add vibrato to it. And this is what I do when I play vibrato. Okay, I'm going to do that one more time, but I'm going to do it different. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like it takes a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on. I'm moving my hand back and forth, back and forth to the pitch antenna. I'm moving it in a direction towards and away from the antenna, but because you're looking at me like straight on, you can't really tell what angle I'm moving. You kind of tell that I'm moving towards and away from the antenna, but it kind of looks like I'm moving sideways a little bit. So I'll give a better a better idea of what I'm actually doing, because you can't see a top-down view or a three-quarter view or a shot from the other side. I'm moving directly to and away from the antenna. I'm not moving diagonal, like some people are moving in a plane that is um, diagonal. Like if you have a plane and that's the antenna, and there's a straight line plane going this way, and there's a plane that's perpendicular to that. Some players choose to move in a plane that's diagonal to that. I am not doing that. I'm moving straight towards and away from the antenna. And the reason I do that is it just has to do with control. There's a bunch of different instruments and a bunch of different playing approaches, and then a bunch of different body types and configurations as far as how the pitch interaction is going to be, because of all those variables being different. So that's why everybody's doing it a different way. And some people will swear they'll to recommend that they don't ever want to move towards and away from the antenna, because it's too crazy, it's too wild, and you change the pitch too much. Well, I disagree with that, but that's what I'm doing, is just moving towards and away from the antenna. And the way I associate that with control, being more in control, just has to do with my ability to control my arms and my muscle motions, and I have the awareness of the specific muscle groups that are being used in order to achieve that very tight motion. Okay, just a little bit more of background. I've got a super wide playing range, and I've got an instrument that is unlike every other Etherwave Pro. So you see an Etherwave Pro, but there's a lot more going on that you don't see. You might have guessed that already based on what you've heard, because it doesn't sound like an Etherwave Pro unless you're not paying attention. This does not sound like an Etherwave Pro. um, the extra bit of background is that I've got a super wide playing range. It's right at about 6 octaves, 6.5, almost 7. So that goes kind of against what has been said in the past about the Etherwave Pro being 5 octaves, which that's true. Yeah, but there's a lot more to it. And if you return to the next workshop that I'm doing tomorrow, where I go into the other subject of visual pitch preview, which I'm going to talk a little bit about today, or tonight, or this morning, depending on where you are. If you come back, I'll talk a little bit more about my instrument and my playing tech. I'm actually going to go into a lot more depth in a lot of other different areas, but today it's just vibrato, or at least that's one of my goals, and then the tools that we use to work on vibrato. So super wide playing range, and what that means is when I do vibrato, the oscillation and the amount of control I need for my arm motion it's very small, but I've got a way to ensure that I can maintain control while doing such a tight vibrato. Some of that I'll talk about tomorrow, but today I'll just kind of summarize why that is, and a lot of it has to do with being seated while I play the theremin. A lot of it has to do with the way I tune the instrument. A lot of it has to do with the configuration of my particular instrument and my body size and location and trajectory. There's so many subjects. It's if you're talking to somebody who's sat or stood behind a theremin for a long time, they can tell you that this is kind of like it's like a cosmos. It's like there's so many different areas you can dive into, and just when you think you've explored a lot in one area, it could just keep on going. It's never ending. The best analogy I can make about that, is you can have a really good violinist play and master the instrument, but then you can have there was a guy, his name was Yasha Heifetz, came around and played the violin, and then he demonstrated that you could do that much more. And so when I say it goes on forever, I'm talking about specifically about nuance. So you can get kind of infinitely nuanced, but when it comes to dissecting an aspect of the instrument, you can take that one thing and actually explore it to a really great level of depth. And that's what you can do with vibrato, and that's why what I'm trying to do today is just cover as much as possible. And I didn't want to go into other subjects because I think vibrato needs its own thing. It's a big subject. I mean, it's to me it's a big subject because I've went through and explored it. Uh, so
Uh, yes, from me, especially vibrato would be important because I feel a little bit blocked with my vibrato. I feel I'm not expressive enough with vibrato. I was, and suddenly, not anymore. I have lost the vibrato.
okay,
Yes.
thanks, Gladys. Um,
I have an issue as well that you might be able to help with. I've been I have to speak very quietly, sorry, because my partner is asleep. But for the past year, I've been playing mostly without vibrato and just like trying to relearn from scratch my technique, like with Carolina first her method, and now with her taking lessons. And now I'm finding that because my technique has changed, I can't play vibrato anymore. And the way I was playing my vibrato was much like you, kind of like towards the antenna, like that. And she's told me to play side to side, but I'm currently having an issue with my shoulder, and I've realized that the movement that she's told me to do, which is kind of this movement,
mhm.
I'm exaggerating it. I can't actually perform it because my shoulder is blocked. It won't go that way. So I don't know if you can help with that suggestions, but
Sure. Yeah. No. This is perfect. Okay. This is great. I'm glad, Gladys, and great that you um, kind of chimed in because I'd like this sort of be like that. If you have a question, this is probably small enough a group where you can just like jump in, and I mean, 36 people, I guess, or 35. That's not very much. So if you have a question or something that you would like to specifically target on, it's okay to kind of jump in. And then maybe after we're done or closer towards the end, we can have more questions. But if you have an idea that you need to get out there and you notice that I'm just like right on the edge of explaining it, it's okay to do that. So totally interject, and uh, we'll take this in whatever directions we need to go. I've got topics that I want to talk about, but it's great to know this because you came here to get some guidance of some kind or some tool of some kind, and that's why uh, this should really be like an exchange and like a discussion rather than just like a lecture. Um, so if anybody else right now needs to express something, concerns or whatever that they have about vibrato, now's a good time. Then I can kind of populate my head with ideas. And if not, I'll just keep on going. Okay. So.
Sorry, if I can.
Oh,
Like
sure.
there's there's this idea like you play a note and you find the note, and then after the loudest point of the note you add the vibrato. Some people use this, and then sometimes I've noticed there's some theremists that basically use vibrato all the time,
Mm-hmm.
like even to find the note.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can speak to that a little bit, I've noticed, you seem to have one particular approach to this, but other people do it differently.
Yeah. Thanks. That's helpful too. I will talk some about the evolution of a vibrato execution. I mean, that might be where that will fit in. I mean, it'll fit into that topic a little bit easier. I've got this kind of broken down. So let's just start. That's like such a super long introduction to this topic. I mean, you just saw me play a couple times with, with vibrato, but it would be cool to actually like stop yapping and start. I mean, I guess I can't do it without yapping. All right, so thanks for those pieces of input. So let's start by talking about what vibrato is and where it came from. I'm sure if you've listened to music, which everybody has, you've heard vibrato performed on every instrument, any instrument you can think of, with the exception of piano and plucked instruments that you cannot physically engage with after the note attack. But nearly every other instrument has some way to modulate or manipulate that resonating vibrating element to interfere with it a little bit to get something to happen, and vibrato gets created. But what exactly is vibrato? I mean, from on the surface level, it's just an oscillation. It sounds just like some noise. What we do is obvious. There's a pitch modulation. So you're going above the center of pitch and you're going below the center of pitch, super fast, or maybe not so super fast. But that is what's like literally happening. And maybe we talk about why we even do it in the first place. For on the theremin, it kind of has a couple benefits that are not ideal, but sort of there. You can't really escape the effect happening, but people are using vibrato to kind of cover up inaccuracies in their pitch. I don't approve. I don't like recommend this like entering your psyche at all. Like it should never be a tool to cover up anything. So if that was your idea of what vibrato is mainly used for, I don't know if you're going to get much more out of this subject. So what I determined what vibrato is it's an acoustic effect. It's a way to extend the mood of a particular spot in the music. You're adding some intensity, or you're taking away some intensity from the surroundings by adding this effect, and it's an acoustic effect. If you were to go and listen to a sine wave generated on a computer or a synthesizer, and it's very pure sine wave, so not too many odd harmonics or unusual harmonics structure, but just a sine wave, and then you apply a vibrato to that, you're not really going to hear very much. You'll maybe hear the pitch oscillating a little bit, but it's very hard to get the feeling of what's going on. So maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But on a theremin, your tone has a big effect on what happens when you apply a vibrato. Does everybody understand that, or has everybody experienced that? Just kind of raise your hand if you've noticed that your tone, that your choice in timbre has an effect on vibrato, or your vibrato has an effect on the tone. Maybe raise your hand, or don't raise your hand at all. Okay, or thumbs up, thumbs down is a good way to see feedback. So that's because when you apply a vibrato and there's a pitch modulation, you're not just hearing the modulation of the fundamental frequency. You're hearing a modulation of every one of the harmonics. And some of the harmonics, some of the harmonics in that tone, that timbre that you've chosen, some of those harmonics are louder than others. And then some of them produce more noticeable effects on the vibrato, more effects on the tone when you apply vibrato. So that's why if you've got a more brilliant sound on your theremin, if you've got a more bright sound and you attempt to do vibrato, you'll notice more stuff going on. A lot of the times that means it sounds more unpleasant. So why does it sound more unpleasant? It's because you're hearing more, it's more obvious that there's a modulation in pitch going on. And if that modulation is not perfectly even and like rhythmically precise and precise metrically around the pitch center, then that's when your ear starts to notice. That's when you're like, oh, that doesn't sound right. So then that makes you kind of want to not, I don't want to add vibrato anymore. It doesn't sound good. Or it makes you want to, okay, turn the filter down or turn the brightness down on your timbre selection. So that happens on the theremin, but that's happening because of what's going on with its harmonic content. So just to get back to what it is, it's an acoustic effect. This is my opinion, and I don't know how many others in the theremin community agree with this, but it is an acoustic effect. It's in your execution of the actual vibrato, you think of it as an effect on the pitch, which it literally is, right? It is an effect on the pitch, but what your ears end up hearing, or what the listener's ears, I should say the listener, because the listener's hearing it probably more objectively. What the listener hears is an effect. They're not there analyzing stuff like you are as a performer. So the listener is hearing this effect happening. And what happens when you apply the vibrato and you're oscillating around the center of pitch, the pitch center is actually emphasized and the intensity of the vibrato, its amplitude, that's like how wide you're oscillating, and the speed at which you're oscillating, they create a different character to the level of intensity that is received by the listener or that the musician wants to, or the performer wants to communicate. So that's why I say vibrato is an extension of your mood, or of the mood of the melody or the performance or improvisation. It's something that typically happens without you thinking too much. I mean, okay, maybe a show of hands for anybody who's like specifically thinking about their vibrato when they play. I'm curious to see if anybody specifically thinks about, oh, I'm playing a note, I should add vibrato right here. Anybody? No, nobody? Yeah, that's because it doesn't usually happen. It's like a second nature. It's like it should be. I think it should be second nature. But in terms of the perspective of the performer, it's like you call upon it when it's necessary. You want it to be natural. You want it to be like the extension of or highlighting of a particular thing that you think is important. So in music, we perform. We're communicating. In that communication, we use melodies and harmony to communicate something. But on a monophonic instrument like the theremin, we're using melodies to communicate. And a melody is basically a sentence. And inside that sentence, you have a bunch of words, and those words are notes. They either fit inside a tonal center or a key center, or they don't. or they're passing in between key centers, or they're being used for modulating to another key or another key center. And then everything else is kind of like garnish. It's like a decoration or color from your palette. So you're the painter. As a musician, you're a painter, and you've got this palette, and you got a bunch of colors. So unless you've got like a virtual, what do you call it? Like a unless you got a multimedia setup where you're actually triggering colors from your theremin, which some people have done. We basically just have sound to work with. So on your palette as a theremin player, you've got things like, and as a musician, you have things like ornamentation, like trills, arpeggiatura, tremolo. But vibrato is actually part of that. I think that's my perspective. Vibrato is part of that. Same thing. I mean, I guess you could kind of group melisma, like vocalists do, into that, because they're really highlighting tonal center when they're going, I'm not going to do that because I can't sing right now. My voice is super dry. My throat is super dry. But where they da 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 without doing any articulation. That's used to kind of highlight or outline a tonal center while they're singing, in between the melodies that they're singing. I mean, everything, if there's any pitch movement, it's usually some kind of melody. Anyways, kind of getting, losing my train of thought for a second. You've got a palette, and you're an artist, and you want to apply a certain color to the words that you're in progress, that are in progress in this musical sentence that you're using to communicate the musical idea that's part of a larger structure of a piece, which is like kind of like a topic or a story, and then eventually you're really just communicating an idea and a mood when you back away and look at it from a broad perspective. So like vibrato is just like really small level, fine level of detail that's just it's added sort of like just sprinkled whenever it's needed for most people. But for the theremin, it's like we don't have too many tools at our disposal for doing a great performance of a good communication of a musical idea. We don't have very many. We've got pitch and we've got volume, which in that volume we have articulation. That's something that can be affected. And with the pitch, you basically have 3 things. You have, obviously you can play different notes. That's how you play a note, you play a note, you play another note, and those notes are separated by a space of time. So you can play a melody by spacing notes apart and changing the pitch and re-articulating or not re-articulating, just doing a transition. And so you have that. And you have the note transition time, so that you have your ability to modulate or to choose like how much portamento you add to that note transition. Or you could, I mean, those sound a lot different, quite different. Just because there's time, time is elapsing while you're transitioning from one to the other. But vibrato is like one of the only other things that we can do to color the experience. And so that's getting back to the why question. That's really that's really the answer to the why. Why you even care about vibrato? It's like it's the single best thing you can develop to improve your theremin playing, aside from developing your sense of pitch, aside from like knowing that you're playing on the pitch center and that you're accurately getting from one note to the next. Vibrato is like the only other thing you can do. So if I just did that same thing, the feeling you get from that after the vibrato has been applied is, it's like night and day. I mean, does anybody? I don't. It's impossible to disagree with that. You're doing something. You've got this effect. It's on or it's off. So that's why we do it. We do it because you've got this extremely limited instrument, and we need to apply. We need to take advantage of every tool at our disposal to communicate the idea that we need to get across.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Samuel Hoffman, how he pretty much used it 100% of the time. And for him, I think ornamentation would be to not do vibrato.
Right. Okay. So I'll speak to that a little bit, and at the same time with Ben's question about when to apply or when to start or doing it continuously. This is a choice. This is also a stylistic choice. So for every variable that you have, which every new, not variable, but for every element that you have, like vibrato is a stylistic element, you have the choice of when to use it and when to not use it. So that's a variable. So earlier I mentioned you can adjust the speed or the rate of the oscillation and the width of the oscillation. That's another two variables. And then there's another variable which is kind of getting back to what Ben was suggesting, which is when to start it. So there's when to start and stop the vibrato. And then there's another one. There's even more. It just keeps on going. But there's another one which is the acceleration from one particular velocity or one particular speed into another. And then there's an even more you can add to that, which is your modulation of amplitude while you're performing vibrato. So earlier you might have noticed that I did a vibrato, executed a vibrato, but I made a slight change in amplitude while that was being performed. And so I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but to explain how I normally do a vibrato is I'll start the note. I don't apply it immediately, and I don't do it continuously like Hoffman, or you might have seen those of you who are familiar with Peter Pringle. You'll notice that the oscillation has already begun before the note starts, and this is what Samuel Hoffman did, and it's just part of that the character of that sound. And so any changes of amplitude that are happening, if you've already begun your vibrato oscillation before you start playing, I mean you can hear how different the character of that articulation is. There's advantages to doing that at different spots in music, and then there's disadvantages of that. The reason you won't find me doing that too often is because I'm very concerned about pitch center. Okay, and we're gonna maybe we'll jump into that subject next. But to wrap up about this, when to use it and when to not, or when to start and when to use it continuously. That's it's a matter of preference and a matter of whether it makes sense within the context of the music that you're performing. So there's two things going on. There's the performer's there's the performer's preference, and then there's the preference or the character that is dictated by the music itself. And sometimes performers kind of override the character that was originally intended by the composer. They'll just override that for different reasons. Some of those reasons might be because they're just incapable of executing, but others because they like their style You know, I like my style, so I'm gonna do it my way. You know, gosh darn it. Um, I don't agree with that all the time, but I can see how it um, you know, defines the character of a person, of the personality, the theremin player's personality. So there's things that you'll see some players do that they cannot turn off, and so you'll see it. And it doesn't matter what piece they're playing. It doesn't matter what style, what genre the piece is, what the music dictates, or what it's asking of the player. They're just going to do it that other way, come hell or high water. They need to do it their way. Um, my opinion about that has just more to do with being flexible. So if you can be flexible and you could do it a bunch of different ways, then uh, it's to your benefit that you apply it whenever you need it. So you turn on the vibrato when you feel like it's necessary, and you start it as quickly as you can after a note center has been reached, and continue if that makes sense in the moment. For me personally, it's gonna be different. If you've noticed that I tend to always wait to add vibrato, it's just because I don't have as much content out on the internet showing what I'm able to do, which you'll see eventually, because I'm going to be jumping back in more into video making very soon. Those of you who have seen stuff I've put up on YouTube, it's probably helpful to know that all that stuff's super old, and my playing has evolved like tremendously in the past 15 years. I mean, it's changed a lot because I've changed. I've gone in and hacked away at this thing. Not the well, also the theremin, but mostly my technical approach, based on awareness of what's going on, and based on feedback that I'm getting from tools that I use. So tools that I've discovered, or tools that I've created. So we need to kind of, okay, there's some time. We need to get into that too, because I'm going to talk to you about a tool that I made. Maybe some of you are waiting for that moment, because that's who all knows what I'm talking about. Okay, 3 people, 4. Okay, I don't know, just a handful of people. So when at the beginning of this, when I said I want to empower you with tools, one of them literally is a tool that you can use to help improve your vibrato. It's all based on the idea of awareness. So when Gladys and Greta explained their situations about what's going on and why you're unable to do vibrato, or since you switched instruments or changed something, it has gotten to be a thing that's really ambiguous and odd to find again. Everything's about awareness. If you knew how to change something about your playing because you were enlightened, or if some detail was illuminated to you by a tool, then you would know what to do next. So this is the grand foible of, I don't know if that's the right word. This is like well, I think it's the worst thing about the theremin. But it could be the best thing about the theremin, depending on who you are, and what you like to, if you like to have challenges and like problem solving. But the worst thing is not getting the right kind of feedback, or not getting any feedback to know what to do next. So a lot of the times that means, like, if you don't have a teacher, you don't have somebody to like show you what they have done and been successful doing, to know what you should be doing, and you don't want to waste time because you've got so much other stuff to do, or you've got a lot of time you've invested in a particular approach and you don't want to lose any of that. That's like the biggest reason to to not change something. I've seen it hundreds of times. You don't want to change your technique, because if you do, you'll lose something. I can just, I don't agree with it, but with doing that, that's also why I'm able to do what I can do, and why I'm able to stand here and and tell you stuff and talk about my 15 years of doing this. It's because I don't do that. If I notice something could be better, I don't care about throwing away years of work, months, whatever, years of work, because on the other side of the change, or the, it's not an improvement until you notice that it's actually working, because it happens that way for everyone. You want to change something, you got to change something, or somebody told you want to change something, you should change something. You don't actually know if it's good or not for you until after you've spent some time doing it. Meanwhile, it's taken whatever, a couple weeks, months, and you're unsure whether that feedback, or whether that choice is going to result in something positive. So I've gone and actually I've done this many times where I've just thrown away what I've thought worked great, because I just decided I'm going to try it this way and see how that goes. So this is the problem of the theremin. Not everybody has the time and the patience to do that kind of thing, and not to mention you've got to be really good at problem solving. How many people feel like they are really good at problem solving? Just raise your hand or thumbs up. So a couple people. All right. And it's too bad I can't see video from everybody that's invisible, because I can only get a small sample of who's responding. So one more time, who feels like they're really good at problem solving? Okay. So I think part of playing this instrument is kind of, if you're not at least a little bit interested in problem solving, it's kind of like it's very very difficult to continue. So getting back to the issue at hand, we're not given the feedback that we need to make the right decision, to make the next decision, and know that it's going to be a positive choice, so that you don't waste your time and you don't have this feeling of uncertainty. So for a long time, I would tell people what to do. You got to do it this way. You got to do it that way. And that was before I really took into consideration how very different we all are in our instruments. And that's the number one reason why, Lydia and everybody, Carolina, has said it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You have to look at a bunch of different approaches and then apply it to your situation. I didn't agree with that for a long time, but it's unfortunate until we get to a standardized instrument build, and that might take another 15 years or 20 years, because of how technology is evolving, and because of, like, if anybody was here listening to Thierry's presentation, that the technology and manufacturing and all that stuff factors into what the instrument ends up being. So if parts are unavailable but you've got a really great idea for a theremin, forget about it, hitting mass market, because the parts are going to become obsolete.
I want to jump in for a second on that
Sure.
feedback topic.
Sure.
I think for a lot of people trying to learn theremin that only really have the internet to interact with other people, a large portion of the feedback they're getting is from a handful of rude people who ridicule beginners publicly. And I would just like to say that drives people away from the instrument, and it's really hurtful, and it happens a lot. And that needs to be addressed as a culture.
That's what happens. So if we step away a little bit from the sphere of education and community, and you look at this instrument, this is unfortunate, but this is what's going to happen with the internet. If you look at any field, if you look at any field, you're going to find the same thing, and it just has to do with the this distribution of people that are knowledgeable and willing to spend the time to educate versus the number of people who are willing to educate but who have not so much experience or just like pitiful human decency and and decent, what do you call it, common courtesy and respect for their peers, or even not even peers, but respect for fellow human beings. This is actually a product of the internet, not so much a product of the theremin community, although it seems like it's part of the culture that we need to address something like this. This is the internet. Like, it's so sad that that is a reality. So when you have events like this is perfect, because then you have ways to bypass that part of the that cultural dark spot, or that part of the spectrum that you can't avoid, but you have to if you want to be able to get some information. So that's like what goes hand in hand with the development of the instrument is that same thing. Once we get to a point where the instrument is more standardized, it's more widely available, the parts and the technology and the manufacturing is stabilized, and it's easy to replace and repair, and it's easy for companies to actually multiple companies to build competing products and get feedback from their customers, and then that cycle will just compound and churn out like higher and higher quality instruments, while there becomes higher and higher quality performers, and the education of the instrument scales up from there, all as kind of like a byproduct. But it's really unfortunate, but what we're experiencing right now is just like, it's a sign of the times. It's just, this is the way the internet is, and this is what we have to work with, because the theremin is so super so rare, such a rare unusual thing. Most of us who are here presenting want it to be like totally respected as a fine art and a vehicle of musical expression. But it takes events like this to actually make that possible. One day this video is going to be available somewhere on the internet, hopefully, and not like behind a pay structure, like it probably will be for the period of time after this Theremin Academy is over. But same with all the other presenters. Like, we want this. We actually do want our perspectives to be shared. I especially do. Okay, to get back to some of the points, I'm kind of really like rambling here. When you have to deal with where you get information and whether you can trust that information, and whether you have to deal with dickish behavior and like childish behavior before you can accept that information and know whether it's worth your time to apply. All that stuff's going to happen, and we have to kind of just like, it's just like the times we're in right now. We're in this insanely stagnating period of time where music performance just doesn't happen the same way. So while all these other musicians are able to slowly start kicking back into gear and starting to perform, for theremin players, it still sucks. It's like there's not that many gigs and opportunities, because you still have it's still, it takes a while for it to ramp up, and we weren't getting, relatively speaking, we were not getting the same number of gigs that you get if you're a violinist or a section player in an ensemble, with the exception of, Torwald and maybe Carolina and Pamela. So they're going to get called for gigs just because of because they've got schedules building up to build out the worldwide performance spectrum of theremin players. It's just going to take a while before this pandemic winds down, and there's really no telling right now. Okay, let's slowly work our way back to vibrato, and maybe at this point, because I kind of talked about what's going on with vibrato. There's a bunch of variables. You can choose to apply the variables at your whether it makes sense to you in the moment, and whether it makes sense in the music, and whether it makes sense to you physically, like your physical capabilities. And at the very beginning of this talk, I mentioned that I don't really want to talk too much about how, the mechanics of how you go about doing it. What I want to do is provide you with a way for you to figure it out for yourself, what to do. And in order to achieve that, the best way that I know of, which I've been using for the past over 8 years, it's really a little bit unfortunate that I had to wait this long before sharing it with everybody. But this is what happens with technology. Things are a lot nicer now than they used to be, and distributing software like this is much easier. So I'm very happy to announce this for this particular event, a new tool, a new thing that you can use to improve your theremin playing. So this is the first time I'm showing it publicly. Although some people may have seen parts of my other software in other spots on the internet in the past. The product is called Merlin Tuner, and it is a tuner. Okay, I just killed that climactic introduction. Okay, here we go. This is Merlin Tuner. Can everybody see it okay? It is there's a number of different things I could use to describe what this is. It's obviously a tuner because you can see the pitch that you're playing at any moment. And at the moment, I'm playing an F sharp 3, or not playing, but I'm sustaining an F sharp 3. But am I playing it? So you're not hearing it. You don't hear anything, do you? So the more appropriate name, I'm just going to back my hands away. The more appropriate name for this tool is a visual pitch preview display, or visual pitch preview. And the next workshop I'm doing tomorrow, I'm going to talk about this in a lot more depth. But I wanted to introduce it in this workshop because this is the tool that you'll use to work on vibrato. And this is what's going to allow you, this is what's going to provide you with feedback that you can actually use to make choices about what you're doing. So I will talk about the basic features right now, and especially the features that apply to vibrato. And then tomorrow I'll go into more depth with what else can be done with the visual pitch preview and Merlin Tuner. It is a product that you can buy like right now if you wanted to. So just quick overview. It is a device that I programmed this in an environment called Max MSP, or Max. Cycling 74 is the name of the company that makes Max software, and Max is a visual programming environment. And that programming environment can be used to share designs of software ideas, and this is kind of like an idea, but now it's like fully fleshed out into a functional tool. So the reason I'm introducing you to Max is because in order to run this device, you have to have a host software, and Max Cycling 74 Max is the host software. So if you're familiar with any digital audio workstation software, they have they have DAW. That's a DAW. They have a software called Digital Audio Workstation, and that's used to get audio into a computer and record it and capture it. But it's also used to apply effects and manipulate stuff in real time. So Merlin Tuner is a device that is basically like a plugin, which is what you would plug into a thing called the Digital Audio Workstation. And this device just happens to work on a digital audio workstation called Ableton Live, because Ableton Live has this functionality that is literally Cycling 74 Max built into it. So it's called Max for Live. So there are two hosts that you can use to run this device. You can run it using Max, which is what I'm doing right now, or you can run it in Ableton Live, and I'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. But in order to use this, like right now, like I said, you can go and buy it. It's on my website. What you're going to get is the device, but you have to have you have to download Max, the software Max, in order to be able to open this, in order to run it. And good news, Max doesn't cost you anything to run. It doesn't cost to download, rather. It doesn't cost you any. It's free to download, and it is free to use. You don't have to register. You don't have to buy a license or anything. If you want, all you want to do is open a device. So you just download the software. There's a link. I'll provide a link. I think I provide a link on my website. And then if you already own this software, Merlin Tuner, then you can just double click it, and then you can see what you're looking at on my screen right here. And you should be able to do exactly what I'm doing right now in terms of previewing your pitch and looking at vibrato. So with that sort of crazy introduction to the software out of the way, let's talk about how to use this, why I have provided to everyone this tool for developing vibrato specifically. I mean, there's a lot of things that this is meant for, but I'm introducing it in this scope of Theremin vibrato because of a feature that was built specifically for it, which you may have noticed already show up on screen. So I'm moving my hand back and forth, and you can see the pitch changing, right? I'm going to have to take a break in just 30 seconds to get a drink of water because it's a lot of talking. So the thing I mentioned earlier is you see the pitch changing, but you don't hear anything. Well, why don't you hear anything? It's because pitch is actually being provided to the visual pitch preview separate from the audio output of the theremin. And in my particular instrument, it's even more different than that. I'll talk about that tomorrow. But just for the sake of just understanding what's going on, I've got pitch going to my computer that's separate from the audio production. So I can see the pitch before I play it. And that's what visual pitch preview enables. Okay, that enables you to know, like, there is zero doubt, zero uncertainty that when I raise my volume hand, if my theremin's unmuted, if I raise my volume hand, that I'm going to be playing an F sharp 3 at this very moment. Okay, anybody wants to check it, they could check it, but I can tell you that's what happens. Okay, so yeah, super crazy long introduction out of the way. I'm going to show you what happens when I do vibrato. So I'm going to play an A. Okay, I'm going to ask somebody what they think is going on. Anybody. And then explain it back to me, please.
I think that you're using CV out from your instrument to correspond somehow in your software with the pitch. So it'd be like the volts per octave, like a lot of analog synthesizers.
Okay, and anybody else want to expand on
Or
that?
it could be. I wasn't even thinking about MIDI. You've got that too.
Okay. And
didn't it use audio extracted pitch detection, I think?
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on what they're seeing?
Sure, if you don't mind. So when I'm looking at the visual pitch preview, I'm seeing the note that you're playing. So I'm seeing that it's an A on the keyboard, you can see. But as you're modulating that pitch, there's also this bar above the keyboard that's moving around. And it looks like to me, that looks like how centered you are on that pitch and the amplitude of your vibrato. But I could be wrong.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add just based on your immediate observation?
Yeah, the bar above the A represents the range of the pitch variation around the center.
Okay. Anyone else?
I wanted to say something similar, but I'm worried about.
Sure, say anything. It's okay. Nothing wrong. There's no.
Again, about rather than the technical stuff about the visual, that strip of red, yeah, and that showing you how centered you are in your vibrato and how even the vibrato is.
Okay, that's it. I mean, if you all are able to tell me that and I didn't explain it to you, then you already know what it does. And I mean, I could ask. We'll talk about it more tomorrow, because that's actually the subject. This tuner is the subject of tomorrow's workshop, and what I do with it is the subject of tomorrow's workshop for my workshop rather. But you're all basically everyone's right. Rick is almost right about everything, and then I couldn't tell who said the last observation about the audio, just because my eyesight's not good, and I couldn't see who was talking. But
I think I was the culprit.
Who was that? Susanna?
Susanna, I think
Susanna,
I was the culprit.
Susanna. Yeah, right. Okay, so with regard to the audio, it's nothing to do with audio. I don't know if that's what you mentioned or not. And then Rick mentioned something about MIDI. This has nothing to do with MIDI, but it does employ the MIDI numbering scheme, and it does actually show you what the MIDI number is of the pitch you're playing. But okay, I mean, that's not entirely true. Okay, there is MIDI happening in the background, but it's not really important to what's going on. And I'm going to contradict myself one more time here, or at least once here. I'm talking about my specific setup here. I'm using a control voltage, like Rick was mentioning, control voltage signal to generate the data, the stream that's being reflected. But this works with audio. So Susanna and Rick are right, but not for my particular application. Okay, so there's two modes. One of them is a OSC input, and one of them is an audio input. I'm currently using the OSC input, so I'll talk about what that is tomorrow. But yes, it does use audio, and yes, there is MIDI involved, and yes, control voltage is involved, but only on this particular instrument. There's just really mountains of stuff I could explain about this entire rig in this setup. that factors into what you're listening, but there's no time to get into it. We've got about I'm going to say about 15 more minutes to this, and then I'm going to end it for early, so that there's a little bit of break before Miles Brown comes in and does his performance. So what does this have to do with vibrato? One last thought. I mean, I'm just going to ramble for a second. My brain is basically hamburger at this point, and you can imagine when you talk nonstop and when your brain's kind of functioning, when it's not functioning, but you've been forcing it to go full steam. It just doesn't last forever. So I'm rambling a lot. Last thing I wanted to mention about the software is that I really just wanted to introduce it, and this is the perfect opportunity. But there's so much more to it. So, like I said, this is the little tuning indicator there, and the keyboard interface, the keyboard visual interface. I've been using this for over 8 years, and I've applied it to every decision I've made about what I do in terms of building my technical approach, in terms of refining it, and in terms of trying new things and going beyond what I'm able to do. I would not be able to do what I do. I would not be able to do what I do, and I would not be able to push on and evolve my abilities if it were not for this specific device. And so it's a momentous occasion, because I've been like it's basically been just me by myself. A handful of people have experienced what it's like to use this. Anybody who's tried my other software, MIDI Merlin. This is basically the tuner and visual pitch preview feature of MIDI Merlin. I've pulled it out and made it its own thing. And it's a lot more reliable and faster to start up and easier to use than MIDI Merlin is. That software is super niche, because you have to be very, very technically inclined and have specific goals in terms of your sound design creation process, and it's not really used specifically as a tool. That training tool aspect of it was in addition to what its main function was, which was to convert audio to MIDI. That's MIDI Merlin I'm talking about. Merlin Tuner is just a tool for visual pitch preview, and that's why it really needs to live on its own, and I think it needs to be shared widely with anybody who needs to know more about their playing. So coming back to vibrato, I'm going to wrap up with vibrato, but not after showing you some examples of how I use it to practice. So I'm not going to talk for a moment, and I'm going to show you what I do to practice vibrato. And these are important. I'm just going to knock through these points I've got written down on the side really quickly, because these are really the key takeaways of this presentation. I've talked about a lot of stuff just to introduce this subject matter, but you kind of have to. It's hard to set this up. There's just too much. Like I said, this is a deep subject, and you could go on like 2 or 3 hours or more drilling down into it. I really had much more prepared. So the key takeaways before I do an example of what I do in practice have to do with pitch stability, pitch centeredness, oscillation consistency, and rhythmic accuracy. Those are the things that are very difficult to achieve on the theremin. But why they're difficult has to do with feedback. And now that you can see a tool this is really actually I should have mentioned this earlier. The most important distinction between this and a regular tuner, it's really an important distinction. It's really the difference between a visual pitch preview and a tuner. Visual pitch preview is like audio pitch preview, where you experience the feedback in real time. Like for a computer, okay, there's going to be a little bit of latency just because there's processing that's involved, but visually, your eyes have a little bit of fudge space. Like real time doesn't mean actual real time when you're talking about a visual. In animation or film, people can get away with 1 frame of inaccuracy if there's a 30 frames per second animation. So real time, I'm just going to say real time means that what you see is reflecting your input as fast as you're humanly able to perceive it, okay? So in a manner of speaking, I mean, if you don't want to like get too technical, it's real time. It's happening in real time. But the real time nature of the display is what differentiates this from a tuner. Tuners generally have a period of time where it takes to resolve the pitch, and that time is no good for us because in that amount of time, your brain cannot combine the information of what it sees and what you're feeling and hearing all at the same time. If you don't have that synchronization, you can't put those pieces together to get an idea. The very first thing I'll do when I'm there starting out with Merlin Tuner is hold my body absolutely still. And you see that tuner indicator moving around. That is the actual pitch moving around. I'm talking, and that's why it's hard for me to hold still. So if I stop talking and I focus on holding my body still, it's getting better. Okay, did everybody see that? It's reflecting exactly what I'm putting into the pitch that's going in. It's 1-to-1 relationship of what is going in. You're seeing it in real time. Actually, I just thought of this right now. Maybe you're not seeing it in real time because of this Zoom presentation. I forgot one thing about my setup is that if there's not audio and video synchronized in the Zoom in my OBS, my computer, video capturing stuff. In that setup, if there's a slight delay, then you're going to see the delay. So I unfortunately forgot to make sure that was dialed in, but hopefully it's close enough. So everybody can see that I'm wiggling my hand around, and it's providing me feedback of the oscillation. Okay, but the key thing that you need to remember. Oh man, there's so much. Now I'm thinking about what I wanted to talk about originally. Pitch stability is so important to vibrato. Without the pitch being centered, vibrato doesn't work the same. It doesn't sound the same, and it doesn't produce the same effect for the listener and for you. If there's ever a time where you felt like, oh, it doesn't sound great, or it's not working, so I just need to leave it out, the reason most likely has to do with pitch center and centeredness. So Merlin Tuner will give you the ability to see how centered you are. First of all, okay, that's step one. How centered are you? How stable is the note? So we're just talking about one note at a time. Okay, we're not talking about what happens when you go across the entire range and when you're changing pitches. We're just the very root level. We're talking about one note, and we're just trying to hold that one note still. And how still can you hold your body? That stillness will have an effect on the sound of the vibrato. And now I'm going to prove it to you. Okay, so here's the F sharp again. And I'm going to apply a vibrato. And now I'm gonna allow my pitch to modulate, and I'm gonna allow the oscillation to modulate, and you'll watch what happens to the tuner indicator, to red bar at the top. Okay, the first thing that you notice is not the vibrato anymore, right? It just sounds like a big mess. So I might as well not even have any vibrato, because I'm making it sound worse. So here's the point I really want to make is, even if I keep the oscillation steady, but I modulate the pitch center, the effect of vibrato, it doesn't come across the same way. You have to have pitch centeredness, and the rate and the oscillation has to be consistent too. So three things that you need to absolutely, like, the takeaway is, if you're going to do vibrato at all, your pitch has to be stable. Here's a tool that allows you to know whether you're centered to begin with and whether you stay on center while you're performing the vibrato, and you see exactly how wide you are within that space. There is one semitone, and the red bar tells you what percentage of the semitone. Most people have like a quarter tone width of vibrato. Quarter tone just means half of a semitone, and that you want it to be in the center of the display. So if you keep that red bar, the solid red bar, in the center, if you can keep it in the center, you're playing in tune. And if you're playing a rhythmically, a metrically and rhythmically precise oscillation, you're playing at a perfect vibrato, mechanical motion. It doesn't mean it's a perfect vibrato, because there's one more element involved, and that is the start and the end of the vibrato. So if you're one of the people that, like Rick mentioned, is already playing vibrato before you start playing, you could use the tuner and get it centered and oscillation happening metrically, accurately, and then when you start the note, it'll be on center, and it'll be sounding like hopefully what you want. I don't particularly do that. There are situations where I want to start vibrato at the beginning, but there are what's more important to me is that I'm on the center of the pitch before I start the vibrato. And then there are exercises that I've written. I'm going to demonstrate one right now for how to practice that. But before I do that, I'm just going to come back to what's happened with Greta and Gladys, where you start playing, something's changed and you're unable to do vibrato, or it's not working. This is what you do, okay? Are you there still? Who all's still here? I'm sure everybody's here, but I can't see very well.
Gladys had to go to bed because she was very, very tired.
Ah,
But she's
okay.
going to watch the recording, so if you talk about what she asked, she'll watch it.
Okay, perfect. That's so nice, isn't it? Look, I know I'm still recording, so this video is definitely going to happen. But to Greta's point about changing a particular aspect and then not being able to apply vibrato the same way, or it's uncomfortable, or it's just simply impossible to due to your particular body or setup. This is what I would suggest, is to take your time with the new approach, whatever that approach is going to be. I recommend that you go towards and away from the antenna, but this is the golden piece of advice. You have to start slow. How many times has everyone heard that? You cannot just expect to have the most beautiful 6 hertz vibrato like Clara Rockmore. Okay, does everybody know that? Clara has this very fast vibrato, and it lends so well into her playing style and her musical sensibility. It all boils down to her vibrato, her approach to vibrato, and her consistency with her oscillation and note center. So if you want a good example of what the best execution of vibrato is, you don't have to look too far. You look at Clara. Clara's vibrato is the way she executes it is a great model, but the problem is you can't quite see on the surface how she's executing, other than just guessing, like mechanically what she's doing. But that's really not that important. What's important is she has built up that muscle memory. She's built up the skills to be able to make it reliable over a long period of time. I think the biggest problem with Clara in terms of educating people about what she did is that she had been playing so long that she did not explain, communicate ideas the same way, or she left out big chunks of what she was doing, how she was going about technically approaching something. Because if you explain this thing a number of times over your lifetime, it's going to change, it's going to evolve. Maybe when Clara finally was able to like speak with interested people, she was unable to communicate in the same volume, the same depth of information. That's one possibility. But from my perspective, I think she didn't do a great job of telling people exactly what she's doing. So here you have a new advantage that Clara could not have. I mean, that wasn't around when Clara was around. But my opinion about Clara is that she did take the time to start everything slow and build it up, because as a virtuoso violinist, as a world-class artist, when Clara started the theremin, she already knew all these fundamentals. She already had all these things under her belt when it comes to how to approach a new thing. That's why she did it so fast. It's not just because she's magical. I mean, she's magical, but this gets back to what I was saying. When I started playing the theremin, I had an enormous amount of experience playing wind instruments. So my wind playing vibrato, all that stuff factored in to how I approach it on the theremin. So if you look at some of my earlier videos, you can kind of tell that there's some influence there. But the point I want to make is slow. Okay, now that you have a tool that you can see what you're doing, you pair that tool. It's just as old as time. The most important tools that any musician can have are, anybody, you're going to tell me, what are the 2 most important tools that a musician can have?
Left ear and right ear.
Okay, those are important, but that's not what I was thinking. I'm talking about physical things like tools that you can buy. Okay.
A musical instrument.
Okay.
Tuner and metronome?
Yeah, you got it. Okay. Thank you. The tuner and the metronome. Most important tools. For the theremin player, tuners have just been problematic from the beginning, just because of the thing I mentioned earlier. It has to do with latency and response time. That's not a problem anymore if you have this tuner. And the other tool is the metronome. So you go and you do what I'm about to do, but at a very slow tempo. And you do this. I recommend a slow tempo, like 60 beats per minute, 60 to 80. I've got my metronome set at 80, I think, right now. I can't see it right now because it's on my other screen. But you should be able to hear it. Hopefully it's not too annoying. Oh, it's not. Okay, just a second. I've got to actually get visual on it to turn it on. Da-da-da. I've got it set to 80. Oh, that's to turn. I hit the wrong button. That was just to unmute it. Okay, so does everybody hear that? And it's not too annoying. Okay, that's my metronome, and I'm lucky to have it plugged into this system so that you'll be able to hear it. Everything is wired together. I'll talk about it tomorrow more. This setup is so insane. It is, I'm not kidding around. This is the most complex theremin rig that exists in the world.
How do you play gigs?
It gets simplified, so it gets scaled. But I can talk about that a little bit more later. So here, I'm going to switch back to the other screen so you can see Merlin tuner. Okay, and I'm going to start. And there's two important things to remember here. Triplets. Does everybody know what a triplet is? This is like basic music theory and rhythm theory. A triplet is just dividing the beat by 3. But triplets are the most useful rhythm or subdivision to use when practicing vibrato, because you use the triplet subdivision to decide when to start the oscillation and when to end it, or basically it's when to start it. But it's the one subdivision where you can start the note and come in at the on the third subdivision with the oscillation, or come in at the second subdivision with the beginning of the oscillation. So here's what it looks like. Okay, does everybody hear how the oscillation is this circular thing? It's like a wave, but at the very top of the oscillation, it kind of goes up in pitch and then goes down in pitch. So that's a wave crest and a wave trough. At every wave crest, you hear the pulse line up with the metronome. That's how you need to do this with the metronome. And that is actually too fast. I would slow it down even more, because the whole reasoning being, if you split a beat into 3 with the triplets, you need to go even slower in order for the oscillations. So that's 3 oscillations per beat. So 3 times 60. If you're at 80 beats per minute, and you multiply that by 3, you have 240 beats, beats per minute. But anything slower, anything slower than like 45, it's going to be hard to tell that you're doing a vibrato, and you want to watch the tuner. My recommendation is to go up to a quarter tone. Does everybody see where the meter is located right now? So up to 1/8 tone above the pitch center and 1/8 tone below the pitch center. Those 2/8 make a quarter. And if you go and you oscillate, and I know it's going to be hard to do at first. Everything's hard to do at first. But you have to do it slow. Why do you have to do it slow? Because if you do it slow, you are building yourself a solid foundation for the muscles that are being used or utilized to execute that motion. This can be applied to every aspect of theremin playing. Okay, it's not just vibrato. Like one of the most important rules I'll tell any student is you never move to a faster tempo unless things are solid at the slower tempo, unless whatever you're working on is solid. And I will break that rule all the time. I'm like terrible at taking my own advice very often. But okay, I know there's exceptions you have to make because you get a piece of music learned really quick or whatever. but if you're going to learn something and you want it to be solid, you have to slow it down. But especially with this vibrato thing, okay, you have to become aware of exactly how much your arm needs to move to execute that. Okay, and this doesn't matter what approach you use to do vibrato. If you do a diagonal thing, if you do it front to back, if you are only using your wrist or your finger, I know some people are using their fingers to do vibrato. Whatever it is, I don't recommend that, by the way. But if you're using whatever approach you're using, you watch and use that visual feedback to make choices about whether it feels good, whether it sounds good, whether it makes sense to your body and your physical capabilities. But it's back to that point. It's feedback. So you use the feedback. You use the real-time feedback to make decisions. But the exercise that I was doing there is triplets on the beat. I'll do it one more time. And I also was planning originally to create a piece of sheet music and distribute that. I was going to show a screenshot of it. That didn't happen. But I'm going to create exercises. These will be available to whoever wants it. These will be exercises where in notation I'll write out the rhythm of when the vibrato starts, when it ends, how long you keep it going, and then you choose the tempo based on what you're able to do. But I'll just tell you my goal. I have a goal with vibrato too. My goal is to reach 6 hertz of oscillation speed. That's six times a second. That's really fast. Clara did averaged about 5 to 6. Okay, to give you an idea. So let me wrap up my final thoughts here, and then we've got to stop just slightly before the hour, so that Miles can get ready. So here's my parting thoughts to anybody that's watching, mainly whoever's watching the recording after this is over, and out there. Get the tool. If you don't get this tool, maybe by a few years there'll be something else better. I mean, I could tell you I'm going to make something better. I'm constantly improving. But if this tool is not available, something else will be eventually. But it has to be real time. There has to be no latency at all. Okay, it's helpful to see the note name, but it's very useful to see what octave you're in. Precisely what octave you're in, because your eyes see that quicker than you can hear. And you can take that information. You can take the information of what you're hearing. You see that, and if you're going to use this as a visual pitch preview, starting from silence, you need to have 2 audio outputs, one for the tuner and one for your theremin needs to go to a different place to get amplified. There needs to be two connections. One goes to the computer. If you this is important. If you send 2 connections to the computer, you need to have, and this is technical, but you need to have a stereo DI box so that you don't have any ground loops forming if you have multiple connections going to your audio interface. Sorry, one more requirement that you need in order to use this is some kind of audio interface. I'm really sorry that I forgot about that. You need to have some way to convert the 1/4-inch output of the 3.5 whatever the millimeters is. That instrument plug output needs to go into your computer, and usually you'll use a computer audio interface. Most people have that by now if you're recording theremin into a computer. And if you don't, consider investing in it, especially if you want to use this tuner, because if you try to use a microphone, it doesn't work the same. You need to use a direct line input, because there cannot be any noise associated with your pitch output that's going into the computer. Otherwise, the tracking algorithm, the tracking will be inconsistent, and it'll be full of noise. Sorry to leave out those details, but the takeaways, I mean, that's really what matters. Vibrato is a color. This is really important. I wanted to mention it earlier, but it was very difficult to do that without context. If you do vibrato the right way, if you do vibrato effectively, and I'm just going to use Clara as an example. Okay, if you do vibrato and execute it as cleanly and as consistently and reliably as Clara executes it, then the vibrato doesn't actually have any effect on your perception of pitch. You don't even think of pitch. All you hear is the character of vibrato. You hear the acoustic effect, like I mentioned at the beginning. That's what you hope to add to your music, to add to your melody spontaneously if you're improvising, or whether it's dictated by the music. You want the effect to come across. You don't want anybody to have any idea that you're doing something to the pitch. So I know that's like counters what you know to be true, which is you're modulating the pitch. Physically, you're modulating the pitch. But if you execute as effectively as Clara or other musicians who have done the same, or who have created a beautiful vibrato, you no longer hear the pitch modulation. You only hear the color, and you hear the emphasis in the musical note, or the emphasis that's being brought out in the musical line. So create the illusion in your vibrato that it has nothing to do with pitch. And if you can convince yourself that you're doing that, then I think other people will probably be fooled too. That should be, and this is the one thing I'm going to say, should be everybody's goal with vibrato and theremin vibrato. Your goal is to fool everyone into not even thinking about it, and to just having no idea that it has anything to do with pitch. Does all of that make sense? Okay, this is the end. Finally,
Randy,
thank you so much, everybody.
Would you play us something in the last couple of minutes?
Sure, I will. In fact, I will play. Is Miles here? Miles is not here.
He's actually not on the schedule for another hour.
Oh, is it 1 more hour from now?
Yeah,
okay, you're right. That's right. It's 1 more hour. I'm just at the 2-hour mark. I'm approaching the 2-hour mark. This has been like an insane marathon workshop presentation. I mean, I've never done anything at this, with this level of depth on one subject. Although I have, went on a few different tangents. I just want to thank everybody who's watching live and stuck around until now, especially everybody that's in Europe and elsewhere in the world. Everybody that's in North America and South America are like lucky. There's still time in the day. So here I'm gonna play something. In fact, I'm going to play a full piece because there's time. And this is also a piece that I've played it in the past. I've played it in past workshops that I've done with Lydia. So some of you may have seen it or heard it before. And I was thinking about waiting till tomorrow to do it, but I think now is a good time because I want to highlight one thing about the vibrato. When you've got things dialed in, when you feel comfortable and confident about vibrato, it's possible to then do things unprepared, and if you have a firm enough, solid enough foundation, it can come across, and you don't need to shoot. That reminds me of a topic I wanted to talk about. You can be a little bit rusty or I haven't played this piece. Okay, I'm going to play it cold. I didn't rehearse it, and I'm setting myself up for like a failure here. But I'll tune real quick and then play it. But I just wanted to say, when you're comfortable with your vibrato, you can pull it out and at different instances or whenever you need to in the music, and not have to worry whether it's going to sound right. And I I wanted to play a piece just now that I didn't rehearse, that I could mess up. Everybody could mess up playing the theremin. It's the easiest thing to do. But I'm going to be watching, I'll be watching. This is another thing we'll talk about tomorrow. I'm going to be watching the Merlin tuner while I play. And that is a huge help for knowing the starting note, but it's a big help for monitoring what's going on in real time. Let's go and I'm going to make some changes in my computer real quick. And thanks, Greta, for suggesting that I play something, because everything that we're talking about really just boils down to what can you do with this when you practice it, when you can execute. And what really matters is the music. And we can talk till we're blue in the face about the mechanics and all that, and we can use these tools till we're also blue in the face, or until our eyes water, which I've done. But what matters is the music. Okay, so resetting, and I'm actually going to go in and make the accompaniment louder. Hopefully it doesn't distort. Okay. Oh, need a tune. And this is another feature benefit, tuning. Which we'll also get into more depth tomorrow. Okay. All right. We will wrap it up right there, unless anybody has any last questions or anything that was missed, or maybe I missed something. If anybody has a question, let's just take 2 questions if there are any. If not, we'll call it a workshop.
I have a question.
Sure.
Yes. Um, I am also a singer, and I met the same problem with vibrato on the theremin than in the voice. I mean, there's some notes that are way much more difficult to play with the vibrato than others, and I don't know why. Do you?
Yes, I know
Why?
why.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah,
talk about I can talk about it tomorrow.
yeah, okay.
That's
Especially what
that's a deep it's a deep subject too.
yeah, okay.
And
So
that has a lot to do with tuning, or with the playable range of the instrument, and it has to do with the pitch trajectory of your particular setup, pitch hand
okay,
trajectory.
thank you.
Uh-huh. Anybody else?
Randy, I have a question, if you don't mind.
Sure. Colin. Okay.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
vibrato, I mean, we've talked about it as an ornament, and absolutely, it's great for bringing out the beauty in a lot of notes and a lot of important points of the piece. But, you know, each piece has a different mood, or there are different sections in pieces that, you know, just the context is totally different. And with, you know, the speed and the amplitude of vibrato being so important to the kind of effect it gives, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to when you would sort of modulate speed, modulate amplitude, and how you would choose what speed and amplitude to use for different pieces.
Okay. That's a great question. So maybe when you get a chance to watch this video afterwards, go back to this performance I just did, and listen carefully. I messed up, not so much in the playing, but I really meant to have the tuner showing above me while I was playing. That didn't occur to me until after it was over. So sorry about that. But if you go back and listen to it, you'll hear times where I'm accelerating the vibrato and times when I'm decelerating or just stopping the vibrato, or starting without any vibrato and then sort of ramping into it. There always has to be some kind of acceleration. You can't get to a new velocity without starting from zero and moving to get to your destination velocity, or a rate of oscillation. So how to choose when it gets applied, that from my perspective should be dictated by the music. If it's a piece of classical music, then it needs to be dictated by the phrase. The phrase is the king. Anybody who's a seasoned classical performer will probably tell you that too. I've got a good friend. Actually, hopefully many of you know him by now. His name is David McGill, who is the author of is the author of the upcoming authorized Clara Rockmore biography. Well, he wrote a book specifically on phrasing. It's look it up, David McGill. I believe it's The Art of Phrasing, if I'm not mistaken. The name of the book. So that's like a reference. It's a great reference. So many musicians have used it as a guide. But anyways, the phrase is the king, and so where I'll decide where acceleration is appropriate, it just has to do with the phrase, and then it also it has to do with what you're feeling in the moment. Sometimes you don't get to choose. You sometimes okay, not that's the wrong way of saying it. Sometimes you don't need to think about when to choose, because your mood at that moment, or the response that you're getting from an audience of how they're reacting or receiving the music will dictate, or will speak to or influence or suggest what you're going to do next, and maybe it's subconscious and you don't even know what's going to happen. Hopefully that answers. I don't even know if I'm answering the question.
No, yeah, to confirm, yeah, that was good. Thanks.
Okay.
If one more thing I could ask,
Sure.
like same topic, would you mind giving some examples of like when you would modulate and how, given like a certain phrase and a certain piece per se?
Okay. Okay, so if I'm starting a phrase where there's not very much melodic motion, where it starts out very plain, maybe you're sustaining a note. If you're ever sustaining a note, you need to do something with the note. If the harmony suggests that there's movement, that there's supposed to be movement, unless you're at the end of a real quiet, still piece of music, and the music doesn't suggest that you do anything. But in most cases, you want to do something. You want to evolve the sound in some way. So in those moments are when I would suggest doing an acceleration. But you don't just do the acceleration, whenever you feel like it. You kind of choose the right moment as it's moving, as it's evolving into the next thing, either the next chordal component or maybe the next part of the melody. So like if I don't know if I can even provide an example of that. I can't think of anything. Okay, let's just play the Somewhere Over the Rainbow. I think it's not an F. Or is it a G? I don't know. F. Okay, I'll actually hit it on center next. So at the very beginning, I held it still, but there was a slight acceleration of the. There was a slight acceleration into the vibrato that I used at the very end of the first note of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. So I'll do it again, but I'll actually continue this time. So acceleration, that we're talking about real fine level of like detail. If you're talking about acceleration of vibrato, when it needs to happen, what suggests you to do it or not, when to do it, and how to do it in a certain way or at a certain speed. Because you got speed, you got velocity, which is like something per second, right? And then you have acceleration is something per second. Change and change, right? Velocity is change over time, and acceleration is change and change over time. So that's really a fine level of detail. If you're able to get to that level of nuance in your playing, hats off. That's so awesome. If you can feel confident in your pitch precision, that no longer becomes a focus, and that the shape of your phrase and what you end up targeting for the top of the crescendo or whatever, maybe an ornament. Maybe I'm doing vibrato. I'm holding vibrato or sustaining vibrato on a sustaining note, but there's an ornament or an appoggiatura that leads into the next thing. Well, that's like a complex thing that's about to happen. If I want to add vibrato just before this complex thing, technically complex, I mean, if I played an appoggiatura, it'd be like, so. I can't. I'm not really thinking about what I want the melody to be, but or what the notes to be. But if you're going to try to do anything complex on the theremin, you have to break it down into smaller components, and I would suggest not working on vibrato if you want to pull that technique off in the first place. You need to just do the sustain, just do the appoggiatura or the technical blip, and then begin to apply things like vibrato after all those fundamental parts are solid. Like it's like the one thing I try to tell everybody that's playing this instrument or any instrument. You have to think of it as a modular thing. Vibrato is a module. You can turn it on and off. You can decide when to use it. Pitch precision or pitch accuracy, that's like a module. How you achieve that, which is your pitch technique, that's a module. And then you put all these things together, and they're basically building blocks of language. Then you put enough of those parts together and like stack them in a certain way, and then you basically have a Lego creation where you're presenting that to the listener in real time, and hopefully you've communicated what you intended. All right.
I just want to jump in on that subject about where to bring it in, and your example of Over the Rainbow. I think about a vocalist. They tend to have vibrato as they're exhaling and running out of energy, and they're going to stop soon.
Yeah.
And so I think with the theremin, we don't have to stop. We can keep going. And so sometimes it's hard to think about how to emulate what a voice is going to do.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. Because I totally jumped over that point. I even have it written down. If you want to learn how to do vibrato, execute vibrato the best that you could possibly do it, you need to listen to vocalists. I can't believe I skipped over this. You need to listen to vocalists, because that's where vibrato's like prevalent. You'll find very few people that don't sing with vibrato, and if it's especially in the classical spectrum, classical scope. So we the best thing we can do is emulate a vocalist vibrato, and when you listen to them, I totally know what you're talking about with that like trailing application, like the very end of the phrase, and as breath runs out, like the vibrato gets applied, and it has a different character because they don't have the amount of breath pressure force pushing out, and so the character of the vibrato is different and colors the sound in a different way. We can do that too on the theremin. You're right. And I think there was a few moments in this piece that I just played. Sorry, I didn't even mention the name of the piece. It is called Vocalise, and it's written by Gabriel Fauré. So that's another piece by Fauré, which, you guessed it, was a vocal piece. I mean, you probably did guess it. And I have played that with a different sound in the past. The last time I did this, one of the workshops with Lydia, but I used a different sound. And we'll talk more about sounds tomorrow. Shoot, there's just too much. Emulating vocal vibrato is so important. You can't emulate vocal vibrato unless you listen to a bunch of it. Like, go listen to Renee Fleming. There's opera singers. You can learn a lot about how they begin. I did mention this earlier, but like the most important thing about the oscillation execution itself is the beginning and the end. Hopefully I did mention that. But the beginning and the end. So if you're not already like the Samuel Hoffman starting out, or other players who have just sustained the vibrato before they start their note, if you're doing a starting and stopping and allowing the notes to be centered or stable for a period of time, the start and end is so important, because that is what either is soothing to the listener or distracting to the listener. We're talking about a really small thing. Is the start of a vibrato oscillation, and I don't think very many people are thinking about it, just because you need to dive down into a really fine level of detail just to understand what's going on to produce it. So if you use Merlin tuner, and the reason I was suggesting Renee Fleming is that you can listen to her and hear, and if you look at the tuner, sorry, you can't see the tuner. Now you can. If you look at the tuner and I start a vibrato oscillation, it's not always starting at full amplitude. It's got to start somewhere, right? But you don't want that first one half oscillation to be noticeable at all. You just want it to start. But in order to do that, that first one half oscillation has to be small, right? So you can go and listen to Renee Fleming recordings where she's starting vibrato. You could almost hear it right there, where you don't know where the vibrato starts. It's so subtle at first. Does everybody hear what I'm talking about, or see what I'm talking about? See and hear what I'm talking about? You can go in and listen to some opera singers and vocalists sing, and they have such wide vibrato that at the very beginning of it, you can actually hear the amplitude start from nothing and increase to the full depth of the amplitude and then they sustain their note, and they've got usually the opera vocalist with vibrato is just like consistent depth for a period of time, and it just doesn't modulate too much. If I had a better situation with my throat, I could probably sing a little bit, it just because. Okay, we'll talk more about that tomorrow. I'm kind of my brain is fully hamburgerized, and I'm in full on rambling mode right now. I just want to say I think that's where we're going to call it. And thank you all for sticking around. Those of you who are still awake, and thanks to anybody who's watching this in pre-recorded form. Appreciate your time, and thanks to Lydia and Thierry for hosting the Theremin Academy events. This has been a really fun experience. And there's more. There's actually way more. I could do like 3 more of these, not on vibrato. Maybe actually one more on vibrato, but not going to do it. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks.
Let me. I'm going to wrap up the actual video recording real quick, and then I'll be right back.